The digital clock on the wall read 11:30 p.m., but the silence inside the Banana Island mansion was loud enough to scream. Ademola Balogun stood in the dark, a glass of amber whiskey sweating in his hand. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, the distant, chaotic yellow lights of the Third Mainland Bridge buzzed with Lagosian energy, but in here, the air was sterile and cold. The newspapers called him the Lion of the Atlantic, a man who could crash the stock market with a single frown. Yet, for the last hour, the most powerful CEO in Nigeria had been reduced to a pacing, jealous wreck, waiting for his housekeeper. The sheer pathetic nature of it made his blood boil. He checked his Patek Philippe for the 10th time just as the service elevator chimed. Ademola didn't move. He became a statue carved from obsidian, blending into the shadows. The door opened, and Enitan stepped in, bringing the smell of rain and exhaust fumes with her. She was drenched, her cheap sneakers squeaking against his pristine Italian marble, water dripping from the hem of her oversized shirt. She looked exhausted, fumbling with her keys, completely unaware of the predator in the corner. "You have a watch, Enitan." Ademola's voice cut through the room, low and vibrating with suppressed rage. Enitan froze, her bag slipping from her shoulder. She looked up to find him stepping out of the gloom, his dark eyes locking onto hers with an intensity that made the air in the room vanish. "I asked you a question, Enitan." Ademola took another step, closing the distance until the heat radiating from his broad chest clashed with the damp chill clinging to her clothes. "Who is he? Some struggling artist in Surulere, or perhaps a banker who promised you the world but sends you home on a bus when he's done?" Enitan's jaw tightened, her heart hammering against her ribs, not from fear, but from a sudden searing indignation. She had spent 4 hours in a cramped hub in Yaba with no AC, debugging code until her eyes burned, only to fight for a seat in a leaky downfall bus for the 2-hour crawl back to the island. She was exhausted, hungry and soaking wet. She did not have the patience for his accusations. "I am not your wife, sir, and I am certainly not a charity case looking for a sponsor. My time off is my own." "It is when it doesn't affect my household," Ademola countered, his voice dripping with the cynicism that had become his second skin. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, his eyes scanning her disheveled appearance with a look that felt like a physical slap. "You come in here past midnight, smelling of the streets, and expect me to believe you are doing anything other than trading your dignity for a ride home?" Something inside Enitan snapped. The polite, invisible house manager vanished. In her place stood the daughter of the late Chief Adebayo, a woman who once knew this world of entitlement better than Ademola did. Without a word, she swung her heavy, mud-spattered backpack off her shoulder and upended it onto the pristine white marble of the kitchen island. There was no lingerie, no expensive gift, no evidence of a sordid affair. Instead, a battered second-hand Dell laptop clattered against the stone, followed by a thick, dog-eared textbook, Data Structures and Algorithms in Python. Ademola froze. The glass stopped halfway to his lips. "I wasn't with a man," Enitan hissed, her eyes blazing. "I was in Yaba at a coding bootcamp. I missed the staff bus because I was trying to fix a back-end error on my capstone project, and then the rain started and the price of the Uber surged to half my monthly salary." She reached into the pile and pulled out a crumpled notebook filled with frantic handwriting and logic flows. "I am not chasing men, Mr. Balogun. I am trying to build a future so I don't have to clean up after one for the rest of my life." The silence that followed was absolute. Ademola stared at the muddy laptop, then at the textbook, and finally at Enitan. The image of the desperate, promiscuous girl he had constructed in his head shattered, replaced by the reality of the woman standing before him, proud, brilliant, and fiercely indignant. For the first time all night, the Lion of the Atlantic looked thoroughly unsure of himself. Ademola reached out, his large hand dwarfing the textbook as he flipped open the cover. The name was written in neat, looped cursive on the inside page. Enitan Adebayo. The name struck him with the force of a physical blow. The anger that had been fueling him drained instantly, replaced by a cold, sharp shock. He looked at her again, really looked at her, tracing the high cheekbones he had previously dismissed as merely pretty. Now, stripped of his prejudice, he saw the undeniable resemblance. Adebayo, Ademola murmured, the word tasting like ash in his mouth. The chairman of Zenith Trust, Chief Femi Adebayo. Enitan didn't flinch. She straightened her spine, pulling her dignity around her like a coat, refusing to look ashamed of the ghost standing between them. He was my father. The silence returned, but this time it was heavy with history. 5 years ago, the collapse of Zenith Trust was the only thing legal society spoke about. It was a tragedy of Shakespearean proportions. Bad loans, a sudden liquidity crisis, and the EFCC circling like vultures. Then came the stroke that silenced the chief forever, leaving his family to be torn apart by creditors. Ademola remembered the headlines. He remembered the public auction where the Adebayo estate in Ikoyi was sold off piece by piece. The Rolls Royces, the art, the legacy. He had been there. He had bought a painting. He looked at the woman standing in his kitchen, dripping wet and shivering. She wasn't just a girl from the streets. She was a girl who likely grew up vacationing in the south of France, who had attended the same Swiss boarding schools as his own cousins. She had fallen from the dizzying heights of Lagos wealth to the very bottom, losing everything but her name. I saw the auction listings, Ademola said quietly, a flicker of guilt pricking his conscience. They took everything. They took the houses and the cars, sir, Enitan corrected softly, her eyes dry and fierce. They didn't take my brain, and they didn't take my resolve to pay back every kobo my father owed, even if it takes my lifetime. Ademola looked at the muddy laptop, then back at her. Most people in her position would have leveraged old connections, begged for handouts, or married a wealthy man for safety. She was scrubbing floors and learning to code in the middle of the night to claw her way back to the top. A strange, unfamiliar sensation expanded in his chest, a grudging, powerful respect. He had thought her a distraction, a weakness. He was wrong. She was iron.
The unspoken truths transformed the penthouse into a world of 2 distinct time zones. By day, Enitan was the efficient ghost in the uniform, ensuring Ademola's shirts were crisp and his meetings were scheduled. But when the sun dipped below the lagoon and the city lights flickered on, the lines blurred. The kitchen island, usually reserved for plating expensive catered meals, became their war room. It started with a simple critique of her user interface, but within a week it had evolved into a rigorous masterclass. Ademola didn't coddle her. He attacked her business plan with the same ruthless precision he used to dismantle competitors in the oil sector. "Your customer acquisition cost is too high," he said one Tuesday, leaning over her shoulder as she navigated the back end of Market Money. "The market women in Balogun Market don't care about a sleek interface, Enitan. They care about speed and trust. Strip the code down." "If I strip it down, it loses functionality," Enitan argued, pointing at the screen with her pen. She wasn't intimidated anymore. She was energized. "They need to track inventory, not just payments." "They won't track inventory if the app crashes on a 3G network, Enitan," he countered, his voice low, vibrating right near her ear. He reached past her to tap the screen, his chest brushing against her arm. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through her that had nothing to do with Python script. The air in the kitchen suddenly felt thick, charged with the hum of the inverter and the scent of his oud wood cologne, mixing with the aroma of the smoky jollof rice she had warmed up for them. They ate straight from the container, forks clinking in the quiet house, a domestic intimacy that felt far more dangerous than the business strategy. Ademola watched her eat, his dark eyes tracing the movement of her hand, the way her brow furrowed when she was thinking. He wasn't looking at her like a project anymore. He was looking at her like a man who had been starving for something he couldn't name. "You have sauce on your lip," he murmured, the roughness of his voice dropping an octave. Enitan froze, her hand hovering halfway to her mouth. Before she could react, Ademola reached out, his thumb brushing the corner of her lip. The touch was feather-light, but it burned. For a heartbeat, neither of them breathed. The distance between the Billionaire and the Maid evaporated, leaving only a terrifying magnetic pull. Ademola's gaze dropped to her lips, and for a reckless second, Enitan thought he might lean in and ruin everything. Instead, he slowly pulled back, though the heat in his eyes remained, simmering like a threat. "Fix the code, Enitan," he hoarsed, turning away too quickly. "We launch the beta next week." The fragile peace of their late-night sessions shattered 2 nights before the beta launch. They were working at the kitchen island, the air humming with the usual quiet focus, when Enitan's phone buzzed against the marble. The screen lit up, vibrating aggressively. Caller ID, Bolu, Python Study Group. Enitan reached for it, a small, tired smile touching her lips. "I have to take this. Bolu thinks he found a patch for the payment gateway." Ademola, who had been reviewing a contract on his tablet, went still. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He didn't look up, but his knuckle turned white where he gripped his stylus. "We are working, Enitan," he said, his voice flat. "It will only take a minute, sir. It's critical for the—" "I pay for your time," Ademola cut in, his eyes finally lifted. They were dark, unreadable, and dangerous. Enitan's hand froze halfway to the decline button. The unfairness of the attack stung, but the look in his eyes confused her. It wasn't the cold annoyance of his CEO, it was something hot, irrational, and deeply personal. "Bolu is not a schoolboy," she defended, her voice firm. "He is the top developer in my cohort, and I was not going to giggle." "Decline the call," Ademola ordered, and standing up, he towered over the island, his shadow falling over her. "Decline the call. Or tell Bolu that if he calls my house manager past 10 p.m. again, I will buy the telecommunications network he uses and block his number personally." The silence that followed was deafening. Enitan stared at him, her lips parting in shock. The absurdity of the threat hung in the air. "Are you jealous?" The question was a whisper, but it hit Ademola like a physical blow. He opened his mouth to eviscerate the idea with his usual sharp wit, to tell her that lions don't get jealous of sheep, but the words died in his throat. He looked at her, the glow of the laptop screen illuminating her neck, the stray braid falling over her eye, and the terrifying truth slammed into him. He hated the phone. He hated Bolu. He hated the idea of any man anywhere making her smile or solving her problems. He wasn't mentoring her because she was a good investment. He was mentoring her because it was the only excuse he had to keep her close. "Get back to work," Ademola rasped, turning his back on her before he did something reckless, like destroy her phone or kiss her until she forgot how to say anyone else's name. He walked to the window, staring blindly at the Lagos skyline, his heart hammering against his ribs. The Lion of the Atlantic had survived market crashes, corporate raids, and betrayal. But standing there in the dark, Ademola Balogun realized he was terrified. He was falling in love with his maid, and for a man who believed love was a weakness, it felt like a death sentence.
Tayo Balogun moved through the shadows of the mansion's lower level, his Italian loafers silent on the marble. He had told the gate security he was there to drop off files for the morning briefing, but his true purpose was surveillance. For weeks, Ademola had been distant, checking his watch in meetings, leaving the office at 5 p.m. sharp, behavior that was unheard of for the Lion of the Atlantic. Tayo peeked around the corner of the grand hallway. What he saw in the kitchen made his blood run cold. Ademola wasn't backing orders. He was leaning against the granite island, sleeves rolled up, listening intently as Enitan pointed at a screen. There was a softness in Ademola's eyes, a terrifying vulnerability that Tayo hadn't seen since the days before the betrayal 5 years ago. This wasn't just a maid helping a boss, it was a partnership, and that made Enitan Adebayo dangerous. If she restored her family's legacy and stayed by Ademola's side, Tayo's own position as the heir apparent to the Balogun empire would evaporate. He needed to excise the cancer before it spread. His opportunity came 20 minutes later. The intercom buzzed, a delivery at the gate. Ademola went to his study to take a call, and Enitan hurried to the front door to receive the package. Tayo moved. He slipped into the kitchen, the cloying scent of his designer cologne masking the smell of the leftover dinner. Enitan's battered Dell laptop sat open on the counter, the screen glowing with lines of Python code. Tayo sneered at the device. It was pathetic, yet it held the key to her destruction. He pulled a sleek silver USB drive from his pocket. It contained a single encrypted folder, the Level 5 confidential tender bids for the Federal Energy Project, alongside a script that would auto-generate a trail of emails sent to their biggest competitor. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He didn't need to be a coding genius like her. He just needed to be quick. He plugged in the drive. The progress bar appeared, green, steady, damning. Copying files, 45%, 80%. "Don't get comfortable, sweetheart," he whispered, his reflection distorted in the dark kitchen window. Transfer complete. He yanked the drive out and slipped it back into his pocket, just as he heard Enitan's footsteps returning from the hallway. Tayo retreated into the shadows of the living room, a cruel smile playing on his lips. The lion thought he had found a queen, but by tomorrow morning he would think he had been sleeping with a snake. The silence in the boardroom of Balogun Energy was absolute, a vacuum that sucked the oxygen out of the room. The projected screen displayed the tender results, rejected. Their competitor had underbid them by a margin so razor-thin it was statistically impossible without inside knowledge. "It was a leak," the head of IT said, his voice trembling as he slid a tablet across the mahogany table toward Ademola. Ademola looked down. The source IP was his own home in Banana Island. The device ID read Enitan_Del Latitude. The world tilted on its axis. For a moment, Ademola didn't hear the murmurs of the board or see Tayo's performance of shocked outrage. All he felt was a familiar, jagged shard of ice piercing his chest. It was the exact same feeling he had 5 years ago. The nausea, the humiliation, the realization that his vulnerability had been weaponized. The woman he had lowered his guard for, the woman he had started to build a future with, was just another transaction. "Sir," Tayo pressed, leaning in, "we have to call the police. This is corporate espionage. The EFCC needs to pick her up." "No police," Ademola said, his voice sounding like it was coming from a great distance. He stood up, buttoning his suit jacket with mechanical precision. "I will handle this." He drove back to the mansion in a blur of speed that terrified his driver. When he stormed into the house, Enitan was in the kitchen, humming as she packed her coding books. She looked up, her face lighting up with a smile that now looked like the greatest lie he had ever seen. "Demola," she asked, stepping forward. "How did the bid—" "Get out," he said. The words were quiet, lethal, and devoid of any emotion. Enitan froze. "What?" "You sold the tender documents to Petro Oil," he stated, walking past her to the fridge to get a water bottle, refusing to look at her, because if he did, he might crumble. "I didn't!" Enitan's voice broke. She reached for his arm, but he flinched away as if she were radioactive. "Demola, I don't even know who Petro Oil is. I've been coding all night." "The logs don't lie, Enitan." He spun around, his roar echoing off the marble walls, making her jump. The lion was back, but he was wounded. He looked at her, and the warmth she had seen the night before was gone, replaced by a dead, hollow stare. "My legal team is pushing for an arrest. If the police come here, you will disappear into a cell in Kirikiri and never come out. I am giving you 10 minutes. Pack your things, leave my house. If I ever see you again, I will let them take you." "Demola, please," she sobbed, tears spilling over. "Go," he thundered, turning his back on her. He stared out at the lagoon, his hands clenched into fists, listening to the sound of her scrambling to pack, the sound of the front door closing, and finally the shattering silence of a house that was once again just a cage.
The humid heat of the mainland hit Enitan like a physical weight, a stark contrast to the climate-controlled luxury she had just been exiled from. She sat in the back of a cramped keke tricycle, clutching her backpack to her chest, her eyes burning with tears she refused to let fall. She had been thrown out like garbage, branded a thief by the man who had, only hours ago, looked at her as if she were the only woman in the world. But as the tricycle rattled over the potholes of Yaba, the despair in her chest began to harden into something cold and sharp. She was Enitan Adebayo. Her father might have lost his fortune, but he had never lost his integrity, and she would be damned if she let a billionaire with trust issues destroy hers. "Drop me here," she told the driver. She stepped out in front of a brightly painted, generator-rumbling building, Blue Link Cyber Cafe. It was a far cry from the marble counters of Banana Island, smelling of sweat, heated plastic, and desperation. Enitan paid for an hour of time, ignored the curious stares at her disheveled appearance, and found a terminal in the back. She didn't open a job board. She opened a terminal window. Her fingers flew across the sticky keyboard. During her time managing Ademola's house, she had optimized the Wi-Fi network to handle his heavy data loads, which meant she still had the admin credentials for the router. If the police came for her, she needed proof, and she needed it now. She bypassed the surface logs and dug into the deep traffic packets. Her eyes scanned the matrix of timestamps and IP addresses, hunting for the moment the file was sent. Target found. Upload to external server. Size 2.4 gigabytes. Time 6:15 p.m. Tuesday. Anytime froze. Tuesday at 6:15 p.m. She pulled her phone, her hands trembling as she opened her Real Hiring app and scrolled through her history. There it was, a completed trip receipt. Pick up Banana Island, drop off Oyingbo Market. Time 5:45 p.m. to 7 p.m. A hysterical, triumphant laugh bubbled in her throat. At the exact moment the Enitan/Del/Latitude was uploading the stolen files, she was standing in the middle of a fish market arguing over the price of tiger prawns for Ademola's dinner. She wasn't the hacker. Someone had physically accessed her machine while she was out of the house. She cross-referenced the device connections for that time frame. Her laptop was active, yes, but another device had logged onto the local network just minutes before the upload began, a device that rarely connected to the main house Wi-Fi. Device ID, Tayo iPhone 14 Pro. The realization hit her with the force of a storm. It wasn't a stranger. It was the cousin who smiled too much and smelled of cheap ambition. Tayo had framed her. She had the receipt, she had the logs, and she had the truth. Now, she just had to survive long enough to deliver it. The skies over Lagos didn't just open, they collapsed. A torrential downpour turned the third mainland bridge into a river of red tail lights and rising water. But Enitan moved with a desperate velocity of a woman with nothing left to lose. She abandoned her gridlock taxi at the foot of the bridge, jumping onto the back of a reckless Okada rider who wove through the stalled cars, the rain slashing against her face like a whip. She arrived at the Balogun Energy Tower in Victoria Island, soaking wet, shivering and clutching her phone like a weapon. The lobby lights were dim, security sparse due to the weather. She bypassed the main entrance, knowing her access card was deactivated, and slipped into the underground parking garage, hoping to catch the service elevator. The garage was a concrete cavern, echoing with the muffled roar of the storm outside. Enitan's sneakers squeaked on the slick floor as she sprinted toward the lift bank. She was 10 feet away when a pair of headlights blinded her. A sleek black G-Wagon roared to life, blocking her path. The door flew open and Tayo stepped out, his face twisted in a snare that looked demonic in the harsh fluorescent lighting. "You really are a cockroach. I flush you out and you just crawl right back in." "I have the logs, Tayo. I know it was you. I know you used my laptop." Tayo's snare vanished. He lunged at her. Enitan turned to run, but he was faster. He grabbed the back of her shirt, jacking her backward with enough force to lift her off the floor. She slammed into the side of the G-Wagon, the breath leaving her lungs in a painful whoosh. "Give me the phone," Tayo snarled, pinning her against the cold metal. His hand clamped around her wrist, squeezing until the bone felt ready to snap. "No!" Enitan gasped, kicking at his shins. She drove her knee into his thigh, fueled by the rage of a daughter who had already lost one empire and refused to let a thief take her dignity too. Tayo grunted in pain but didn't let go. He slapped her, a sharp, stinging blow that tasted of copper and humiliation. "You think he loves you," he spat, wresting the phone from her weakening grip. "He's a broken man, Enitan. I did him a favor. Now give me the damn." Enitan sank her teeth into his hand. Tayo howled, dropping the phone. It skittered across the concrete floor, sliding under the chassis of a packed sedan. As he dove for it, Enitan scrambled away, her chest heaving, eyeing the fire alarm on the far wall. She didn't need to win the fight. She just needed to make enough noise to wake the lion upstairs.
Tayo's hand was inches from Enitan's throat when a voice, cold and heavy as a grave marker, echoed through the concrete garage. "Touch her, Tayo, and you will not leave this building walking." Tayo froze. The elevator doors behind him had slid open silently. Ademola stood there, not a hair out of place, but his eyes were burning with a terrifying, quiet violence. He didn't look like a butcher. He looked like a butcher waiting for the shop to close. Ademola, Tayo stammered, backing away, his charm evaporating into sweat. She's crazy. She broke in. I saw the logs, Ademola interrupted, stepping forward. He didn't run. He stalked. I saw the upload time, and I saw the GPS data from the car tracker. You were here. She was at Oyingbo Market buying prawns. He stopped in front of his cousin, his voice dropping to a whisper. You used my trauma against me. You tried to destroy the only honest thing in my life because you were jealous. Before Tayo could beg, police sirens wailed at the garage entrance. Ademola had called them himself. As security dragged a screaming Tayo away, Ademola turned to Enitan. He didn't care about the rain or the mud. He pulled her into his arms, burying his face in her wet hair, his body trembling. I should have trusted you, he whispered, the lion finally admitting he was scared. I am so sorry. 6 months later, the grand ballroom of Echo Hotel shimmered with the flash of cameras. The banner above the stage read, Market Money, the future of SME finance. Enitan stood at the podium, radiant in emerald silk, her hair in long, intricate braids. She finished her speech to thunderous applause, her eyes seeking only one person in the crowd. Ademola stood in the front row, not as her boss, but as her lead investor, looking at her with undisguised worship. Later, away from the noise, he found her on the balcony overlooking the Atlantic. It was a mirror of the night it all began, the ocean, the city lights, the two of them. But this time, there was no darkness between them. You know, Ademola said, leaning against the railing beside her, I spent years sitting in the dark, waiting for betrayal to walk through the door. I never expected it to be my salvation. He turned to her, pulling a velvet box from his pocket. You once told me you didn't want a sponsor. Good, because I don't want a dependent. I want a partner. He knelt, the diamond catching the Lagos starlight. Enitan Adebayo, will you run this empire and me for the rest of our lives? Enitan looked at the man who had once been her monster, now her greatest champion. She smiled, pulling him up to kiss him. Only if I still get to debug your code. Deal, he breathed, and kissed her as the city cheered below them.